Larry Dykes, how you doing today, sir?
Doing terrific.
So we have a beautiful day here at the White River Yacht Club, and we're going to be saving some memories of your family.
Absolutely.
And we're going to start today with Neff, your father, Neff Dykes, and we're going to talk a little bit about his life, but also about his military career and storming Normandy. Is that correct? So what do you think about this concept in general of being able to have these for your kids, their grandkids, and so forth?
I am so thankful to be able to have this that they will have for the rest of their lives and hopefully beyond.
That's right. All right, so let's just start out with your father. Just a little bit of background on where he was from and how you'd like to kind of lead into his life in the military.
Sure. He was born in Landisville, Indiana, close to Marion and Fairmount, in a farmhouse, and grew up very poor in a rural setting, and experienced not having much money for much of his early life.
So as he grew up, I know that he didn't go very far in school. That was another aspect, right? How far did he go in school?
He made it to his sophomore year, so he had to leave school at that point. It's not that his parents kicked him out, it's just that they didn't have much money, and he needed to be self-sufficient as quickly as possible.
And his father was George, his mother was Sarah.
Yes.
What do you know about their background a little bit?
His dad was George Scott Dykes, but he actually went by Scotty. And his mom was Sarah Lavina, and she actually went by Viney. They met, my goodness, early 1900s, and then had their first child, actually a set of twins, were stillborn. Then they had a daughter, my dad, his brother, and then their youngest sister.
Now, do you happen to know where he went to high school?
Probably in a one room school somewhere around Landisville up by Marion.
Gotcha. And then what was his path for choosing to go into the military?
Well, he actually was drafted at age 32. He had been in a protected industry. He was an interurban operator in Indiana, the electric railway system, and did passenger and freight, so that had been a protected industry in the early part of the war. And then as we entered late 1943, he got his induction notice at age 32. It's hard to sometimes think of that. I say I was born late in my parents' lives. My dad was actually 8 months old when the Titanic sank. And he got drafted. His dad passed away, and his brother, also in a protected industry, he drove fuel trucks, was killed in a bad accident in the fall of 43. So fall of 43, not a great year for him. But he got his induction notice. He went to train in Alabama, did his basic training, received his expert marksman badge, and then after that training was sent to New York and then staged to England in the spring of '44 for training for Operation Overlord.
So what do you know about kind of as the operation and as he got there, kind of what happened? I'm sure he gave you some details if you kind of like to speak to that
Like
a little
many
bit.
of those guys, he didn't talk a lot about it. It was tough to get information out of him. For one thing, he was older at 32.
Right.
And I do remember one story he told me that I always thought was funny. During basic, the drill sergeant early on said, the first thing you guys need to do is forget that old bitch back home. And Dad didn't take too well to that and went to the sergeant and said, I've been married 7 years. That's not the old bitch back home. That's my wife. And then expected to get his ass chewed. And instead, the sergeant laughed, slapped him on the back and said, you know, I like guys that have a little backbone to them. You're going to be the leader of your group during basic training. He also added that for whatever reason, he had a perfect 36-inch stride. So in all the drilling, the other guys matched his stride, and it worked out for all the close order drill that they did. But it was hard to get him to talk about, like so many of those guys. He'd deflect, he'd tell a funny story, but in terms of talking about what was actually going on, that was very hard to get out of him.
Now, was he in the 30th Division?
He was in the 30th Division. Old Hickory was the name of it. Largely a National Guard group with guys that have been drafted, sprinkled into it. Actually ended up being one of the most decorated divisions in the U.S. Army. Played a huge part in the breakthrough at St. Lo, and then made an incredible stand in something called the Battle of Mortagne in northern France, and suffered hellacious casualties. And also suffered one of the largest friendly fire incidents in our military history between St. Lo and Mortagne. Bombers, days before radar was perfected, had bad weather, and because of bad weather, dropped a lot of bombs and killed the vast majority of the 30th Division by friendly fire.
Now, he also was a scout for his platoon, is that correct?
Yes. Today that would be called Point. He was first scout. And again, he always deflected with humor. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means I was dumb enough that the platoon commander, when we would come to a clearing, said, hey, Dykes, walk across that field, see if anybody shoots at you, and if they don't, then you can wave us across. So that's what he did.
Now, when they pulled up on Omaha Beach, I know that there's noted here in the article that basically he spoke to his commander in charge, and would you like to kind of describe what
Sure.
happened?
He was not in the first wave. He was second or third wave. So not so much direct fire as they went on the beach, more now explosive ordnance in the sand and snipers, but they had obviously trained for this. And when they landed, they had their topographical maps, but they didn't match what they were looking at. So what they ended up finding out, he actually landed twice. They landed on Utah Beach, realized they were in the wrong place, had to go back out through the water, get on the landing craft, and then go down the coast to Omaha Beach to land.
Was there anybody on Utah Beach when they got there? Was it? I mean, there had to have been some type of interaction.
Well, lots of bodies,
yes.
But different topography.
Right.
And the checkpoints they had on their maps did not match what they were looking at. So that necessitated reloading and a second landing. Advanced into Normandy, was involved in a battle called the Breakthrough at St. Lo. And then from St. Lo, they were advancing to a town in France called Mortagne. And actually, there is a series called Against the Odds on the American Heroes channel. Season 2, episode 6, I stumbled across one Sunday morning, is titled The 30th Division and the Battle of Mortagne. And that was his experience. Between St. Lo and Mortagne, he didn't step on a mine, but one of his fellow soldiers stepped on a mine, and obviously that guy was killed. Dad was severely injured.
And that was right. Yeah, it was right next to him.
Yes. Lots of shrapnel. Basically, I guess you'd call it a body concussion from the force of the blast. Lots of neurological damage. And so that ended his war. At that point, he was in field hospitals. This is later in August of 44. He was in field hospitals, and prior to cell phones and all the communication we have now, all my mom knew was that he had been wounded significantly and was in a field hospital. And the only way she knew when he had been moved would be when the letters she wrote him daily came back in a bundle, because he was no longer at the hospital that she had the address for.
And this went on for about 9 months, correct?
About 9 months.
Wow. Did you ever speak to her about that time and how that was hard for her?
She was reluctant to talk about it also, but it was obviously hard. She had no idea how badly he was wounded.
Right.
Again, communication was different then. She didn't know, had he lost body parts? Was he in a wheel? She had no idea what was going on with him, and wrote a letter every day.
And every letter came back, essentially.
Or
majority.
When bundles came back, she knew he had been moved to another field hospital, and then had to figure out a way to track down where he was now. Was he still in France? Was he in England? You know, what was going on with him at that point? But yeah, weeks at a time, no idea what kind of shape he's in or where he even is.
So basically from September, October till May of 45, he was not being able to communicate with wife, trying to figure out if he's going to be able to walk again, and then eventually they let him know that he's ready to come home.
Yes.
And he came home in a wheelchair.
Yes. Yes, he returned actually to Camp Atterbury eventually. Troop ship across New York and then transport here.
And how old was he at that point? If you went into
33.
30, so just basically a year.
Yeah.
Year and a half or so, probably.
Yeah.
So what was that transition for him when he came back, and how your mom was able to care?
It was very difficult. At that point in time, they called it battle fatigue. Now we call it post-traumatic stress, but not knowing how much he was going to recover, it was a difficult time for them. Nightmares, some drinking, but issues in readjusting. And actually, I want to, if I could add something here, it was interesting. In the late 90s, he and I watched a documentary about post-traumatic stress in Vietnam veterans. And after we watched it, I asked him, what do you think of that? And I'm thinking the big tough World War II veteran is going to say, well, those boys just need to suck it up and get by it. And he actually said, those boys had no chance. So I said, well, what do you mean? And his answer was jet planes, at which point I'm totally confused. Only made it 10 years through school. Very smart, perceptive man. And I said, what do you mean jet planes? And he said, well, when we came home, we were on a troop ship for over 2 weeks with guys that had just gone through what you had gone through. And we were drinking all the smuggled liquor we brought on board, playing dice, playing cards. Every night, guys would wake up screaming. The guy next to him would hug him, and nobody thought a thing about it because tonight you might be the guy screaming. But we had that time. Those Vietnam boys came off the line after their tour of duty. Again, World War II, we had no tour of duty. You were over there until you were killed or injured to the point you couldn't fight.
Right.
They come off their tour of duty, they hop on a jet plane, and 18 hours they're in a bar in Honolulu or San Diego or Los Angeles. And then he looked at me and said, your mind just can't shift gears that fast. And I always thought that was one of the most profound things I had ever heard. And I've shared that with friends of mine that were Vietnam veterans. And when they hear it, they just shake their heads and say, that's exactly what it was like. But he came home. The interurban system had basically gone away. But a guy he knew had gone to work for Trailways bus line. So then he became a bus driver for Trailways, doing long haul trips. Eventually he became the safety director on a national basis for Trailways bus line.
And that was about 3 or 4 years after him starting?
About 5 or 6,
5 or 6.
The whole time.
Okay.
And then the same guy that had worked with him on the interurban side ended up with the outcome of the electric railway system, went to work for a company called Public Service Indiana in Plainfield, and recruited Dad on the safety side, and he eventually became the fire prevention supervisor for Public Service of Indiana. So
And that was all the coal fire stations?
all the coal-fired generating stations, which he always referred to as big brick buildings with coal under intense pressure and heat, so they were all just bombs sitting there on the ground. Fire prevention, obviously important. So then he did that for the rest of his working career and developed a talk called The Chemistry of Fire that he gave to volunteer fire departments, Rotary clubs, Kiwanis clubs, Optimist clubs, all over the state of Indiana voluntarily. He received no pay from public service for doing that. He did about 80 of those a year all over the state, always on the basis of if someone comes to one of these and they learn something that saves their life or a loved one's life, then it was worth the drive to Cedarsville or Rushville or whatever it was. He retired from public service, and after about 6 months, public service approached him and said, you know, we got a lot of great public relations out of your talks, and we're getting requests. Are you interested in doing anything? And he said, sure. So for about the next 8 years of his life, for mileage, he would do about 40 talks a year.
Wow.
All over the state. And it was one of those things where it was a mission to him. When he said if one person survives because of this, it was worth it. And he basically retired when I went to college. Again, a lot older.
And how old was he when he retired?
65.
And how old, you obviously were 18 or whatever?
Yeah.
Close, around there?
Yeah, when I went to college, he retired. And he and my mom enjoyed a nice retirement together. And they spent most of the winter in Florida because he hated cold weather. And at about 80, he was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. Actually, he was diagnosed by my wife's OBGYN, who became a good friend of mine. We were moving, he helped out, and at the end of the day, he said, there's something about your dad's gait that bothers me. He should go see a neurologist. So he did, found out he had Parkinson's, managed it very well.
And they believe that came from the explosion.
Well, you
It could have derived from
kind
that.
of wonder. He didn't have classic Parkinson's. They called it Parkinson's-like syndrome. And yeah, always the thought was there, is that a lingering effect of the neurological damage he suffered when the mine exploded. But he did very well for 3 years. And then at that point, he noticed that he could see his pulse right about here in his stomach. Went to the doctor, found out he had an aortic aneurysm. And during the pre-surgical workup, they found he had a lot of blockages in coronary arteries. What he thought for years had been heartburn was actually angina pains. Never had a heart attack. So he's supposed to have surgery. One of my favorite stories about him. We're in Methodist. He's laying in bed, the surgeon comes in, and the surgeon is talking about millimeters of size on the aneurysm and percentages of occlusion, and goes through all this, gets done, and my dad looks at me standing at the foot of his bed and just shrugs his shoulders. And I said, well, basically, Dad, he's telling you he needs to do both surgeries, because if he only does one, the other condition's going to kill you soon anyway. And he dropped the hammer as he pointed at me and winked at me and looked over at the surgeon and started laughing. The surgeon was so shocked that I would be so blunt with him. But I knew my dad. And he reached over and patted the surgeon on the arm and basically said, Doc, when you're talking to me, just lay the cards on the table. I can play any hand I'm dealt. Probably the toughest man I've ever known. Had the surgeries, recovered, then the Parkinson's and the dementia got worse to a point that my mom couldn't care for him. So he had to be in a long-term care facility, thankfully just a few blocks from where they lived. Was there for 3 years. I remember getting a phone call from my mom. 3 years he was there. We had a day where we got something like 13 inches of snow. She couldn't get out of her driveway, couldn't get out of the little condo they had, and called me crying. I can't go see your dad today. And unfortunately, I was up in Munster, Indiana. I can't do anything, Mom. You only miss one day. In 3 years, that's the only day this little tiny 80-year-old lady missed. And from that, I always tell people, I was so fortunate that I got to witness my mom and dad's love story. She was the ultimate caregiver, and a 60-year marriage, which I find very impressive. I do give a talk about my dad at some veterans events, and I always end it this way. He made it to 87. All but 3 years pretty good. But at the end of my life, if I can look at myself in the mirror and say I was half the man he was, I will consider my life a huge success. Growing up, every little kid has a hero. I was incredibly blessed. I actually lived with mine.